shadow from the past. Detective Sam Harris never cared much for the past. It was a place for ghosts, regrets, and unsolved mysteries that had already claimed too many lives. But when an old case file resurfaced in the dusty archives of the Briarwood Police Department, he found himself drawn into a murder that had been buried for over 3 decades. It started with a letter, a handwritten note, brittle with age, tucked inside an unsolved case file from 1987. The ink had faded, but the words were unmistakably clear. Asterisk, Richard Turner is guilty. You buried the truth. Find Helen and you'll see. Asterisk, Helen Matthews had disappeared on a cold autumn night 32 years ago. A beloved schoolteacher, last seen leaving a local diner. No body had ever been found. No evidence. No conviction. The prime suspect, Richard Turner, a wealthy businessman with ties to city officials, had walked free. Now someone, long after the case had gone cold, wanted justice. Sam sat in his dimly lit office, the letter between his fingers, staring at Turner's photograph from the case file. The man had been in his early 40s back then, handsome, powerful, untouchable. If he had murdered Helen Matthews, he had lived the rest of his life knowing no one could touch him. But someone had known the truth all along, digging into the past. The first person Sam visited was Alice Harper, Helen's best friend. Alice was now in her 70s, living in a modest home just outside town. She greeted him with wary eyes, her hands shaking slightly as she poured tea. Helen never would have left on her own, Alice said. She was in love. She had plans. And then, she was gone. In love. Sam raised an eyebrow. With whom? Alice hesitated. She never told me his name, just that he was someone important. Someone she shouldn't have been with. Sam felt the first thread of connection tighten in his mind. If Helen had been involved with someone powerful, someone with a reason to keep their affair secret, that could explain why the case had been buried so quickly. He needed more. A name from the grave. Sam's next stop was City Hall. He sifted through old land records, searching for anything tied to Richard Turner. The man had owned properties all over Briarwood, but one stood out. An abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town, sold off quietly in 1988, a year after Helen's disappearance. That night, Sam drove to the property. The house was a skeletal ruin, its wooden frame eaten away by time and neglect. He moved carefully through the debris, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Then, in the basement, he found it. A set of initials carved into the wooden support beam. HM 1987. Helen Matthews had been here. As Sam turned to leave, he felt it. A presence. A shadow moving in the trees outside. He wasn't alone. The warning. The next morning, Sam found his office door ajar. Inside, his desk had been rifled through, his files disturbed. But it was the message scrawled on his wall that made his blood run cold. Asterisk, leave it alone, Harris. Or end up like him. Asterisk, him. Sam didn't need to ask who him was. His father, Thomas Harris, had been a detective in Briarwood before he died. His death had always been ruled an accident, an unsolved hit and run. But now, for the first time, Sam wondered if it had been something more. His father had worked on the Helen Matthews case. Had he come too close to the truth? The confrontation. Determined to get answers, Sam went to confront Richard Turner. The old man was now in his 70s, retired in a lavish mansion at the edge of town. When Sam arrived, Turner was sitting in a sunlit study, sipping whiskey. "You've been asking questions," Turner said, not bothering to look up. "That's a mistake." Sam laid the letter on the table between them. "Someone knew what you did, and now I do too." Turner chuckled. "You think you have something, detective? Helen Matthews is a ghost. No body, no crime." Sam leaned in. Not for long. For the first time, something flickered across Turner's face. Fear. The truth unearthed. With new urgency, Sam revisited the farmhouse with a forensic team. They searched the basement, the surrounding land, and finally, the old well behind the house. The bones were buried deep, but they were there. Tests confirmed it. Helen Matthews had been found. With the body recovered, the case was reopened. The evidence, the witness accounts, the corruption, it all led back to Richard Turner. He was arrested 2 weeks later. His name splashed across every news outlet in the state. But for Sam, it wasn't over. Because buried in his father's old case files, he found something else. A note his father had written just days before his death. Asterisk, I know what happened to Helen. I know who covered it up. If something happens to me, don't stop searching. Asterisk. Sam stared at the words, heart pounding. His father had known. And now, so did he. But there was one name missing. The person who had left the letter. The real shadow from the past. And they were still out there.